The origins of Zoroastrianism lie in the ancient Indo-Iranian spiritual traditions that flourished across the Central Asian steppes and northeastern Iranian plateau. Its founder, Zarathustra, later known as Zoroaster in Greek sources, was born into a priestly family during a time when society was dominated by polytheistic rituals, tribalism, and sacrificial worship of multiple nature deities. Scholars debate the exact dates of Zarathustra's life, but many now place him between 1200 and 1000 BCE, though traditional Zoroastrian chronology suggests he lived as early as 6000 BCE. His homeland is widely believed to be somewhere in eastern Iran, Afghanistan, or Central Asia, regions that were once vibrant centers of early Indo-Iranian culture. Zarathustra's early life was spent immersed in the religious customs of his community. As a member of the Spitama clan, he was trained in ritual knowledge, fire ceremonies, and the veneration of deities such as Mithra, Anahita, and Indra. However, from a young age, he became disillusioned with the corruption and moral ambiguity he observed in both religion and society. He questioned the value of animal sacrifice and rejected the idea that appeasing multiple gods through offerings was the true path to righteousness. Seeking spiritual clarity, Zarathustra withdrew from worldly life and began a period of intense meditation and reflection. At the age of 30, he experienced a divine vision on the banks of a river, where he encountered Vohu Mana, good purpose, a radiant being who led him into the presence of Ahura Mazda, the wise Lord and Supreme Creator of the universe. In this revelation, Zarathustra was shown that Ahura Mazda is the only true God, embodying absolute goodness, light, truth, and order, opposed by Angra Mainyu, later Ahriman, the destructive spirit of falsehood, chaos, and evil. This vision transformed his understanding of existence and laid the foundation for the dualistic worldview that defines Zoroastrian theology. The universe is a battleground between two opposing spiritual forces, and every individual must actively choose which side they serve. Zarathustra's teaching centered around moral choice, individual responsibility, and the pursuit of truth through the triad of good thoughts, humata, good words, hukta, and good deeds, havarshta. He preached that humans were not powerless pawns in the struggle between good and evil, but rather active participants, empowered by free will. His message of ethical monotheism, spiritual purity, and social justice was revolutionary in its time, and placed moral agency at the heart of religious life. Despite initial rejection by the powerful priestly class and tribal elites, Zarathustra eventually gained a key ally, King Vishtaspa, a regional ruler who converted to Zoroastrianism and provided the prophet with political and military support. With this backing, Zarathustra's message spread more widely, taking root among the people of eastern Iran and Central Asia. Zarathustra's teachings were eventually compiled into a sacred body of scripture known as the Avesta, with the oldest and most sacred part being the Gathas, written in an early Avestan dialect. These hymns, deeply poetic and philosophical, reveal his passionate belief in moral order, divine justice, and the eventual triumph of good over evil. Unlike the rigid priestly systems of neighboring civilizations, Zoroastrianism under Zarathustra emphasized the role of the individual's conscience and choices, setting the stage for a religion that would inspire empires and influence later faiths across millennia. This radical monotheistic vision of Zarathustra, centered on moral responsibility, divine order, and personal choice, marked the beginning of a spiritual movement that would shape Persian culture for over 1,000 years and leave an indelible imprint on the development of Western religious thought. At the heart of Zoroastrianism lies a set of spiritual and ethical principles that distinguished it dramatically from the prevailing religious ideologies of its time. Unlike the polytheistic religions of ancient Mesopotamia, India, and Greece, Zoroastrianism introduced one of the earliest forms of ethical monotheism through the worship of Ahura Mazda, the wise Lord, who is omniscient, omnipotent, and wholly good. Ahura Mazda is not a remote or arbitrary deity, but a just and benevolent creator who actively guides humanity toward truth, harmony, and righteousness. Zoroastrian theology is fundamentally dualistic, not in the sense of two equal gods, but as a cosmic moral conflict between Spenta Mainyu, the holy or beneficent spirit, and Angra Mainyu, the destructive spirit. Spenta Mainyu is the emanation of Ahura Mazda's goodness, promoting life, truth, and order, while Angra Mainyu represents falsehood, death, chaos, and destruction. These two forces battle not only in the cosmos, but within the soul of every human being. Zoroastrianism thus presents life as a moral battlefield, where each person is a soldier in the struggle between good and evil. However, unlike some later dualistic religions, Zoroastrianism teaches that evil is not eternal. It is a temporary corruption that will be destroyed in the end times by divine order. A defining feature of the faith is its powerful emphasis on free will. Humans are not passive spectators in this cosmic drama, but active participants with the responsibility to choose between right and wrong. This belief in free choice underscores every aspect of Zoroastrian ethics and separates it from deterministic worldviews. Salvation is not determined by blind fate or divine whim, but by the individual's thoughts, words, and deeds. The religion is famously summed up by its threefold ethical motto: good thoughts, good words, good deeds, humata, hukta, varshta. This trinity of virtues is not merely a moral code, but a spiritual practice that helps align individuals with Ahura Mazda's will. Every act of kindness, every truthful word, and every noble intention contributes to the cosmic victory of light over darkness. Zoroastrianism also teaches a vivid doctrine of the afterlife, which reinforces personal accountability. After death, the soul is judged at the Chinvat Bridge, a metaphorical crossing that separates the world of the living from the afterlife. If the soul's good deeds outweigh its bad ones, it crosses safely into paradise, the house of song. If not, the soul falls into a dark abyss, a realm of suffering and separation from divine light. This belief in a moral reckoning laid the groundwork for similar concepts later adopted in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The Zoroastrian cosmos is organized with divine beings known as the Amesha Spentas, 6 holy immortals who represent aspects of Ahura Mazda's divine nature, such as truth, righteousness, and devotion. These beings help guide humanity and act as intermediaries between the spiritual and material worlds. Alongside them are Yazatas, lesser divine entities who oversee elements of nature like the sun, moon, wind, and fire. Fire, in particular, is a powerful symbol in Zoroastrian worship. It represents divine light, truth, and the presence of Ahura Mazda. However, Zoroastrians do not worship fire itself. Rather, they use it as a sacred symbol in rituals and prayer. Fire temples, where eternal flames are tended by priests, serve as spiritual centers for the community. Ultimately, the Zoroastrian worldview is one of hope, moral clarity, and cosmic justice. It affirms that good will triumph, that every soul matters, and that the fate of the universe hinges not on fate or force, but on the conscious choices of individuals. These bold theological principles, introduced over 3,000 years ago, helped shape not only Persian imperial ideology, but the ethical frameworks of many world religions that followed. The rise of the Achaemenid Empire under Cyrus the Great marked the beginning of Zoroastrianism's transformation from a regional spiritual movement into an imperial ideology that would influence one of the greatest empires of the ancient world. Cyrus, who founded the Achaemenid dynasty in the mid-6th century BCE, was known for his political wisdom, military conquests, and progressive policies, including religious tolerance. Although historical records do not definitively confirm whether Cyrus himself was a strict Zoroastrian, inscriptions and later texts suggest that he was influenced by Zoroastrian principles, especially the emphasis on justice, truth, and the moral responsibility of kings. It was under Darius I, r. 522-486 BCE, Cyrus's successor, that Zoroastrianism more clearly became aligned with the imperial state. In the famous Behistun inscription, Darius praises Ahura Mazda as the source of his kingship and power, attributing his victories and authority to the will of the wise Lord. This inscription, written in Old Persian, Elamite, and Akkadian, is one of the earliest known declarations of monotheistic belief from a ruling power. Darius presented himself as a defender of order, Asha, a key Zoroastrian concept, against the forces of chaos, druj, or falsehood, thereby legitimizing his rule, not only politically but spiritually. During the Achaemenid period, the Zoroastrian priesthood gained prestige and influence, while the exact religious practices varied across the vast empire. From Anatolia to India, Zoroastrianism served as a unifying ideological framework for the ruling elite. Temples and fire altars became more prominent, and the use of fire as a central element of worship became formalized. However, it is important to note that the Achaemenid rulers also respected religious diversity. Subjects across the empire, including Jews, Babylonians, and Egyptians, were allowed to maintain their religious traditions. This inclusive policy not only promoted loyalty, but also helped Zoroastrianism coexist with other beliefs, avoiding the conflict and suppression often seen in later empires. Moreover, the Zoroastrian ideas of divine kingship, ethical governance, and moral accountability began to shape imperial Persian culture. The king was seen not merely as a conqueror, but as a chosen servant of Ahura Mazda, responsible for maintaining truth, law, and cosmic balance. These ideals permeated the administration, justice system, and political philosophy of the empire, setting a precedent for later rulers in Iran and beyond. The fall of the Achaemenid Empire came with the conquest of Persia by Alexander the Great in 330 BCE. This marked a turning point for Zoroastrianism. Alexander's destruction of key Persian cities, including the ceremonial capital of Persepolis, resulted in the loss of sacred fire temples, royal archives, and possibly parts of the Avesta texts. The Hellenistic period that followed introduced Greek philosophical and religious ideas that conflicted with traditional Zoroastrian doctrine. Under the Seleucid Empire, the Greek successors of Alexander in Persia, Zoroastrianism was no longer a state religion. The clergy lost state support, and many religious institutions declined in power and structure. However, Zoroastrianism did not vanish. It continued to survive among the Persian rural population, where local priests, known as magi, kept the faith alive. The oral transmission of scriptures and community-based rituals helped preserve essential doctrines during a time of political and cultural upheaval. The faith adapted to survive within a pluralistic environment that included Greek cults, Babylonian practices, and emerging Eastern philosophies. In the Parthian period, 247 BCE to 124 CE, the situation began to improve. Although the Parthians, or Arsacid dynasty, were originally nomadic and less centralized than the Achaemenids, they gradually came to embrace Zoroastrianism as part of their cultural heritage. While they never declared it the official religion, the Parthians patronized Zoroastrian temples and respected the role of the clergy in local governance. Some syncretism with Hellenistic elements persisted, and regional variations in belief and practice became common. During this time, Zoroastrian cosmology and eschatological ideas, beliefs about the end of the world and final judgment, became more elaborate, likely influenced by interaction with Mesopotamian and Hellenistic thought. Concepts such as resurrection, the coming of a savior, Saoshyant, and the purification of the world through fire became central to Zoroastrian doctrine. These beliefs would later echo in Abrahamic religions, especially Judaism and Christianity, which developed within the same cultural sphere. Though it lacked centralized religious authority, the post-Achaemenid period was a time of preservation and quiet development for Zoroastrianism. The religion's resilience during this time would set the stage for its grand revival under the next great Persian dynasty, the Sasanians. The rise of the Sasanian Empire marked a dramatic revival of Zoroastrianism as not only a spiritual belief system but a centralized and institutionalized state religion. Founded by Ardashir III in 224 CE, the Sasanian dynasty sought to restore the glory of the ancient Persian empires and viewed Zoroastrianism as a core element of Persian identity and statecraft. Ardashir, a devout follower of the faith, worked closely with Zoroastrian priests to restructure and formalize the religion into a hierarchical system that could support imperial ideology and governance. Under the Sasanians, Zoroastrianism became deeply embedded in all aspects of political and social life. The religion was organized under a powerful priestly class, headed by the Mobadan Mobed, priest of priests, who held immense authority. Zoroastrian doctrines were codified, and efforts were made to compile and preserve the Avesta, the sacred Zoroastrian scriptures. Though much had been lost during the Greek and Parthian periods, the surviving texts were gathered and expanded into a comprehensive religious canon, complete with theological commentaries known as the Zend. Fire temples became widespread and architecturally prominent across the empire. These temples housed sacred fires that were kept burning perpetually, symbolizing divine presence and eternal truth. Rituals were systematized, including purification ceremonies, prayers, and seasonal festivals such as Nowruz, the Persian New Year, which was linked to Zoroastrian cosmology. The Sasanians also reinforced the religion's ethical teachings, emphasizing the cosmic battle between Asha, truth, Chak order, and Druj, lie, chaos. The Sasanian emperors portrayed themselves as divine rulers chosen by Ahura Mazda, and their legitimacy was tied directly to their ability to uphold religious law. Coins, inscriptions, and court ceremonies were saturated with Zoroastrian symbols. However, this fusion of church and state also led to religious intolerance. Competing religions such as Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, and Manichaeism were often suppressed. Persecutions, particularly under kings like Shapur II, reflected the Sasanian effort to consolidate power through religious unity. Dissent was equated with rebellion not just against the crown, but against divine cosmic order. Despite these rigidities, the Sasanian era saw theological expansion and philosophical depth within Zoroastrian thought. Clerics wrote elaborate treatises on metaphysics, the afterlife, cosmology, and morality. The religion, once decentralized and oral, now became a codified state system that influenced Persian society from top to bottom. By the 6th century, Zoroastrianism stood as a pillar of Persian imperial identity, preparing to confront a new and world-changing force, Islam. The fall of the Sasanian Empire came swiftly with the Arab-Muslim conquest in the mid-7th century. In 651 CE, the last Sasanian emperor, Yazdegerd III, was defeated and killed, marking the end of Zoroastrianism as a state-sponsored religion. The Islamic Caliphate, propelled by a unifying religious vision and powerful military campaigns, absorbed the Persian territories into the rapidly expanding Islamic world. This shift not only transformed the political landscape, but also had a profound and lasting impact on Zoroastrianism's survival and practice. Initially, under early Islamic rule, Zoroastrians were granted the status of dhimmi, non-Muslims who were allowed to practice their religion in exchange for paying the jizya, poll tax, and accepting subordinate legal status. While this arrangement allowed Zoroastrianism to continue in limited form, it also led to systematic marginalization. Fire temples were gradually abandoned or destroyed, Zoroastrian texts were lost or hidden, and many adherents, facing economic and social pressure, converted to Islam. Over the following centuries, especially under Abbasid and later Islamic dynasties, the number of practicing Zoroastrians declined drastically. The loss of imperial patronage meant that Zoroastrian communities had to retreat into more remote or rural regions, particularly in Yazd and Kerman, where small groups maintained their traditions in secrecy and isolation. Religious leaders preserved oral traditions, conducted secret ceremonies, and maintained sacred fires despite persecution. However, the lack of centralized authority and the ongoing threat of suppression meant that many rituals and texts were forgotten, and the religion began to fragment internally. In response to the growing pressure, a group of Zoroastrians fled Persia and migrated to India, where they found refuge along the western coast, particularly in Gujarat. These migrants would later be known as the Parsis, and they played a critical role in preserving Zoroastrian heritage, scriptures, and identity in a more tolerant environment. Meanwhile, those who remained in Persia, later known as Gabars, continued to suffer discrimination and gradual cultural erasure. Following the Arab conquest of Persia in the 7th century CE, Zoroastrians, who had once practiced their religion freely under the powerful Sasanian Empire, faced increasing religious persecution under the new Islamic rule. As Islam became the dominant religion and non-Muslims were subjected to the jizya tax, social discrimination, and at times forced conversions, many Zoroastrians began to fear for the survival of their ancient faith. Between the 8th and 10th centuries CE, a significant group of Zoroastrian refugees made the difficult decision to leave their homeland in Greater Iran. Their goal was to preserve their religious identity, customs, and sacred rituals without the constant threat of oppression. Sailing across the Arabian Sea, they landed on the western coast of India, particularly in the region of Gujarat, a culturally diverse and economically active part of India. According to traditional Parsi legend, narrated in a text known as the Qissa-e Sanjan, Story of Sanjan, the Zoroastrians arrived in Sanjan, a small town in Gujarat, where they were granted asylum by a local Hindu ruler, believed to be Jadi Rana. The story recounts that the local king initially hesitated to accept the foreigners. But after the Zoroastrians promised to respect local customs, speak the local language, Gujarati, and refrain from converting others, he permitted them to settle. In a symbolic act, the Zoroastrian priest demonstrated their peaceful intentions by dissolving sugar in milk to show that just as sugar sweetens milk without altering its nature, the Zoroastrians would enrich Indian society without disrupting it. Once settled, these immigrants, later known as Parsis, meaning people from Pars, Persia, worked hard to preserve their ancient faith. They re-established fire temples, a central part of Zoroastrian worship, where sacred fires were kept burning continuously, symbolizing truth and purity. They continued to observe important religious festivals such as Nowruz, New Year, maintained endogamous marriage traditions, and ensured the transmission of religious knowledge through a hereditary priesthood. Despite being a small minority, the Parsis were diligent in keeping their cultural and religious identity alive across centuries of Indian history. While they embraced Indian languages and adopted certain local customs in clothing and social etiquette, they remained firmly committed to the ethical and theological teachings of Zarathustra, Zoroaster. The real transformation of the Parsi community began in the 18th and 19th centuries, especially under British colonial rule. Due to their openness to Western education, fluency in English, and commercial acumen, Parsi began to rise prominently in commerce, industry, and civil society. Cities like Bombay, now Mumbai, became centers of Parsi influence. Families like the Tatas, Godres, Wadias, and Patis emerged as pioneers of Indian industry and philanthropy, founding schools, hospitals, and research institutions that benefited all communities in India. Importantly, despite modernization and economic success, the Parsi continued to preserve core elements of their faith, including their dakmas, towers of silence, where the dead are laid to rest according to ancient ritual, and their continued use of Avestan liturgy and fire temple ceremonies. By integrating peacefully, contributing immensely to the broader Indian society, and maintaining a distinct religious and cultural identity, the Parsis remain one of the most respected and influential minority communities in India. Their migration story is not just one of survival, but also of adaptation, contribution, and resilience. Zoroastrianism, once the dominant religion of the Persian Empire and one of the most influential belief systems in the ancient world, now stands as a small but resilient faith community in the modern era. Its current global population is estimated to be between 100,000 and 120,000, with the largest communities residing in India, primarily Mumbai and Gujarat, and Iran, mainly in Yazd and Kerman. Smaller diaspora communities can also be found in North America, the United Kingdom, Australia, and parts of the Middle East. In India, Zoroastrians are known as Parsis, descendants of those who fled Iran between the 8th and 10th centuries CE to escape Islamic persecution. They have played a disproportionately influential role in Indian society, particularly in business, law, science, and philanthropy. Notable figures such as Jamsetji Tata, the founder of the Tata Group, and Freddie Mercury, the legendary frontman of Queen, are of Parsi descent. However, Despite their accomplishments, Zoroastrian communities today face a demographic crisis. Two of the most pressing issues are low birth rate. The community's birth rate has fallen well below replacement level. Many couples are having fewer children, and delayed marriages or choosing to remain child-free have further exacerbated the decline. Intermarriage and conversion restrictions. Traditional Zoroastrianism, particularly among Parsis, does not recognize the children of interfaith marriages, especially when the mother is non-Zoroastrian. Conversion is also generally discouraged or outright prohibited by many Orthodox factions, creating barriers for those who wish to join the faith. This has led to internal conflicts between reformist and conservative groups within the community. In Iran, the Zoroastrian population is similarly facing challenges, including social marginalization and restrictions under Islamic law, despite being constitutionally recognized as a religious minority. Many Iranian Zoroastrians have emigrated due to political and economic pressures, further reducing the population. To combat this decline, some modern Zoroastrian organizations, especially in the diaspora, have begun advocating for inclusive practices, such as accepting interfaith families and allowing conversions. These changes, however, remain controversial and have sparked intense debate within the global community about identity, purity, and survival. In terms of cultural revival, there has been a renewed interest in Zoroastrian philosophy and environmental ethics, particularly its emphasis on the duality of good and evil, the importance of free will, and the sacredness of the natural elements, fire, water, earth, and air. These values resonate with modern ecological and spiritual movements. In summary, Zoroastrianism in the modern world is at a crossroads. While its rich heritage continues to inspire, its future depends on how the community balances tradition with adaptation in an increasingly globalized and interfaith world. Zoroastrianism's theological and ethical ideas deeply influenced the development of the three major Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, emerging in ancient Persia. Well before these faiths, Zoroastrian teachings introduced foundational spiritual concepts that later became central in Western religious thought. Among the most significant contributions are the dualistic ideas of heaven and hell as final destinations for souls based on their earthly deeds, and a day of judgment when the righteous are rewarded and the wicked punished. The figure of Angra Mainyu, Ahriman, a destructive spirit opposed to Ahura Mazda, bears resemblance to Satan, the adversarial force in later religions. Moreover, Zoroastrianism emphasized free will, teaching that individuals have the power and responsibility to choose between good, Asha, and evil, Daru J, a concept that echoed through the moral frameworks of later monotheistic traditions. These parallels suggest that Zoroastrianism was not only a major religion of its time, but also a theological bridge that helped shape the moral and eschatological doctrines of much of the modern religious world.